There's a reason why Whites Treefrogs are as popular as they are. These goofy tree frogs have great personality, good feeding response, are hardy, and thrive in captivity. If I was setting up an enclosure for Whites Treefrogs, I think I'd go for the largest one I can afford. I'd get a low wattage basking light and an LED vivarium light and a timer. A misting bottle, some sturdy branches for climbing, maybe ghostwood or manzanita. I'd want a nice-sized water dish, some arboreal hides, and a fresh bottle of supplement powder. Personally, I would go with potted plants and cork flat background, but I've seen lots of great setups done with substrate, leaf litter, and a custom 3D background. No matter how I would set them up, I'd buy everything I need in one go by visiting today's show sponsor, NE Herp. I've been setting up frog enclosures with supplies purchased from NE Herp since they opened in 2009, and I keep going back because of their excellent customer service, quick shipping, and wide selection. I always find the herp supplies I need at neherp.net. If you keep reptiles or amphibians and you're looking to build the perfect bioactive habitat, NE Herp is your go-to source for everything you'll need. Trusted nationwide by hobbyists, Whites Treefrog enthusiasts, zoos, and your favorite Frograck Podcast host. neherp.net is your one-stop vivarium shop. Thank you, NE Herp, for supporting today's episode of the Frograck Podcast. While I was recording with Reptidonz, we had a pretty bad connection. Our conversation doesn't really have as much banter as usual because there was a 3-second delay every time one of us spoke. The connection was actually lost 5 different times during the conversation, but thankfully, because of the Riverside software I'm using, you might not even notice the breaks in connection, and we didn't lose any parts of the conversation. Welcome to the Frogcast, the Frograck Podcast. I'm Joe, your host, and today's guest is Jessel Nevins, who goes by Reptidonz online. How are you, Jessel?
I'm doing very good, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for joining me today. Hey, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, what frogs you keep.
Absolutely. So my name is Jessel Nieves. I'm the owner and operator of Reptidonz. As far as frogs, I keep quite a few species, mostly tree frogs. Whites Treefrogs is what I'm known for. Amazon milk frogs. I keep a couple of masked tree frogs, some yellow-spotted climbing toads. And I do have a couple of terrestrial species as well, like tomato frogs, Pac-Man frogs, a couple odds and ends. I have one random African bullfrog, and occasionally I'll get different species and see if it kind of fits into the system that I have. But for the most part, I focus on tree frogs. They're the easiest for me to keep, especially being down here in Florida and doing things semi-outside and in my garage. So I got to pick things that work well with that type of a setup.
Yeah, I hear you. A lot of keepers do something similar. Once you choose one or two species, you find other species that require very similar care and feeding and routine so that it works together in your collection.
Absolutely.
You got a really cool collection. You're really active online in the community, sharing knowledge and promoting other keepers and breeders. I really appreciate that about you.
Thank you.
Tell us how you got into the frog keeping hobby and how long ago.
I've been breeding reptiles since 2012. I started with geckos, and I didn't branch out into frogs until right around COVID time or a little bit after. Unfortunately, the reason that I got into frogs is because I was doing a trade with a frog breeder, and they didn't hold up their end of the trade. I had purchased some frogs from them before, and my plan was just to continue to purchase from them and sell them and support this breeder and continue to have that type of a relationship with them. But when they didn't hold up their end of the trade, I took that personally, and instead of getting upset, I just decided to start doing it myself.
Awesome. Well, we can use more people breeding and keeping frogs and spreading them through the hobby. They're quite popular, but amphibians in general are sort of a niche within the reptile industry.
Absolutely.
What's when you were younger? What's sort of like your first experience encountering frogs, either as pets or in the wild?
Yeah, so I was born in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is known for the coqui. It's a very small species of frog that has a very distinct call. So even though I didn't have per se interactions with this species, just because they're so small and hard to locate, and also because I was such a young kid, I wasn't exactly out there looking for them. But it's something that definitely stands out to me. It's if you mention Puerto Rico to anybody, they almost immediately ask about the coqui. If I've seen one, if I've heard it. So absolutely, that was one of my first experiences. And then also, while I still lived in Puerto Rico, I have a very distinct memory of getting my foot stuck in a hole one time, and there was this huge toad underneath my foot, and um, I was afraid. I was a little kid, so at first I was afraid that my foot was stuck, and then I looked down and I see just this monstrous toad sitting there. Thinking back, I couldn't even tell you what species it was, and it probably wasn't as big as I'm making it out to be today. You know, when you're a kid, you have
Yeah.
things look grander than they are, and so it was just this monstrous big thing that was going to probably eat my foot in my mind. But the my passion for animals, a lot of it stems from fear. When I was younger, I remember kind of being afraid of a lot of things, being afraid of snakes, being afraid of frogs, whether it be they were going to bite you or jump on your face or something like that. And when I went to school, I studied psychology, and one of my favorite topics was phobias. It was just fascinating to me. And I decided to kind of address one of my phobias, which was snakes. And when I started learning about them, I realized that the more knowledge that I gained, the more it kind of killed my fear for it. And when that fear was completely gone, it turned into a fascination. You know, you start seeing aspects of whatever it is that you fear, if it's a snake or a frog, that you wouldn't otherwise notice because you were too focused on how much you're afraid of them or what they might do to you. Or so that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy educating other people, because I know how much fulfillment I've gained from these things that I was previously afraid of and would never consider interacting with. My fear of snakes was pretty severe. I wouldn't even be in a room with a snake. I would just quickly volunteer to walk out if anybody wanted to show a snake, whether it was a classroom, whether anything like that. But when I got into the process of kind of conquering this phobia, I realized that snakes was just one category, and this can be applied to pretty much anything, whether it's animals, whether it's heights, whether it's, you know, anything. The moment that you can move past the fear, there's so much more on the other side. There's passion, there's fascination, there's education, everything. Everything sits on the other side of fear. That's kind of how I feel about it. So yeah, for me it was a whole new world once I moved past the perspective that I had of these things. And that's kind of how I got into reptile keeping and frog keeping.
That's so cool. Nice. What was the first frog that you said that you were keeping reptiles, and a trade deal moved you into the sort of self-realization that, hey, I can probably keep and breed frogs myself. Maybe that's my best path forward in this hobby. What was the first species of frog you got?
So the first species, while I was doing the reptiles, I was real heavy into geckos and snakes. I kind of had everything except for amphibians. And my customers kept asking me, do you have any Whites Treefrogs? Do you have any Whites Treefrogs? And I didn't, but I got enough inquiries to the point where I got curious about it, and I ended up reaching out to this breeder. And I bought a lot of 30 of them, and with full intention of selling all 30, every single one of them. And the moment that I received them and set them up and started observing them, I quickly fell into the same kind of fascination as I understood why my customers were asking for them. The Whites tree frog, to me, keeps a lot like a reptile. They kind of behave like a reptile. They're very hardy like a reptile. And the more that I watched them, because the group that I got was very young, so I couldn't just immediately sell them. I was kind of forced to keep them. And in that period of time that I was growing them out, I fell in love with them, man. They were just fun to watch, fun to feed, everything that you like about keeping a reptile. I don't know why, but I never thought that I would feel that way about a frog, and I felt exactly that way about the Whites tree frog. It was everything about them, even watching them sleep, the way that they kind of cramp themselves up and make themselves as small as possible. The way that they change their colors is incredible. How vigorous they are when they eat, just everything about them, the way that they kind of disregard each other. They'll kind of chew on each other and sit on top of each other like they're not even there. Everything about them, the things that you would think that I thought would be boring about them, was exactly what drew me in. I just enjoyed watching them. When lights went out and it was time to feed, that was the first tank that I wanted to do, because they're so animated when they're eating. You kind of see them go from this cocoon all day long when they're not moving, and the moment that you shut those lights off, they open up those eyes and they start moving around, they start looking, and man, that sucked me in. When you have an animal that, I mean, we're animal lovers, you know, we love all animals, but there's certain ones that you really just enjoy watching them. You enjoy interacting with them. When you think about frogs, to me, I remember thinking how just fragile I thought they were, and how it wasn't like a reptile. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I really couldn't have. Everything about them made me fall in love. And then with working with the Whites tree frogs, it kind of opened up my eyes, like I said, to all the other species. And I wonder if I would like these. And I started kind of dabbling in different species, and that's kind of how it took off. I never really intended to be a frog breeder. I didn't even think that I would be successful in breeding. I was just fascinated with the keeping of them. And the more that I observed them, the more that I learned. And they kind of showed me. The frogs kind of taught me what I needed to do. Even when it came to breeding, the first couple times I failed, because the information that's out there on the internet, it's not great. Some of it is dead wrong, and so you see these setups with the egg crate on the bottom, and people are afraid that their frogs are going to drown, and those kind of things, and copying those kinds of things didn't yield success, because tree frogs really need water to breed. They need to be in kind of a free swimming type of a situation, and a lot of people play it really conservative when they're trying to get them to breed. They put that egg crate, they put a bunch of props in the water because they want to make sure the frog is able to get out of the water and not drown. When in reality, if you listen to the frogs and what they're telling you, they want to be in the water when they're breeding. You know, they need to be free swimming. You need to give them a large surface area. So all these details you kind of learn in a crash course by listening to the frog. They tell you. So if you put your frog in and you have all these areas for them to stay out of the water, and you check the rain chamber every day, and they're just sitting on these areas but no eggs, you know, you do that so many times and you're like, all right, well, let me try this, let me change this. And over time, you know, they showed me what it was that they needed in order to have success.
All right, so you discovered why Whites treefrogs are one of the most popular pet amphibians. I think it's a good parallel, if you're coming from the reptile side of things like you did, to think of them like crested geckos, you know? People have been keeping reptile and amphibian pets for almost 50 years, And there's reasons why species like ball pythons, crested geckos, and Whites treefrogs sort of rise to the surface as the most commonly available and popular frogs. Not only because people can successfully breed them, but because, as you described, they're really enjoyable to keep, and their care they need can be provided by almost anyone who's willing to learn. So like I said, tree frogs dominate the tree frog market in the reptile and amphibian industry. You've been breeding them and selling them, so you're involved in this really, really large market. How would you describe specifically the Whites tree frog market? Is it saturated? Is there still a lot of demand? Do you have a hard time selling the animals that you breed? Tell me about the market.
Man, I've been doing this specifically with Whites Treefrogs for about 5 years. The market is incredibly healthy. First time that I did it and I saw the volume that I produced, I was almost certain that it was going to be a problem, that I wouldn't be able to get rid of these types of numbers in a consistent enough way where I could do it multiple times a year, and I couldn't have been more wrong. Not only are there obviously pet keepers that are looking to buy 1 to 10 animals, but a lot of businesses, a lot of wholesalers, they see how popular these frogs are, and they're buying them in lots of 100 to 200 frogs at a time. So to a person like me, when you see that volume for the first time, it can be incredibly overwhelming. But creating the relationships and opening the outlets to be able to move these numbers it's not as wild and as unreachable as people think it is. It does take some work. You have to build trust with people. You have to get out there and put some frogs in the right hands. You can't do everything by yourself, no matter how big your following is or how big your name is. You're gonna need help. I mean, we're talking about thousands of frogs. I've watched the market for the last 5 years, and it's progressively gotten better. Sales are better than ever this year. The prices fluctuate, and the price of an animal has a lot to do with how well it sells. Obviously, not everybody's willing to throw X amount of money just to have a frog, but there are collectors out there that are paying a premium price for certain morphs like camos, like melanistics, like super snowflakes, and the quality kind of speaks for itself. People want unique animals that maybe everybody else doesn't have. So the market is healthy. I've seen breeders complain about how it's going to get saturated if too many breeders come on scene. I've taught quite a few people how to breed. They've had their own spawns, and they've simultaneously, while I'm selling the volume that I'm selling, they've been able to move each and every single one of the frogs that they've produced as well, which is a testament to how healthy the market is. I don't think it's anywhere near saturation. These frogs are in demand. So the market for Whites treefrogs, even considering the volume that they produce and the amount of breeders that are doing it successfully, it's healthy in my opinion. We recently imported the camos and the melanistics from United Kingdom, and I think that introducing new genetics, making things that people haven't seen or have only seen in other countries, contributes a lot to keeping that market healthy. The new morphs and the possibilities that they provide with combining them with the existing things, it just keeps it exciting, and it keeps people kind of still watching, still wanting to be involved and maybe have one of these new morphs, even though they already have Whites treefrogs. But I do notice every year that there's a lot of people that are just entering, a lot of new keepers. So I haven't really seen a decline, and I've only been doing it 5 years, so it's not that long. But I've only seen growth. I haven't seen any stagnance. I haven't experienced any plateaus as far as sales go. It's been pretty steady. Everybody has, slow periods as far as sales go, but it's been steady.
That's awesome. Any hobby, especially a live animal hobby, needs a great species that can get new people involved. I think Whites Treefrogs are one of a handful of amphibians that fit that category. I'm amazed at the market. I'm amazed at how big it is, and I am kind of surprised that it continues to be strong and not oversaturated. I've done the math before, just off the top of my head, thinking between the 2 big chain pet stores in North America and the 5 regional chain pet stores, there's well over 3,500 locations that essentially always have Whites Treefrogs in stock. And there's just 2 or 3 companies or large-scale breeders who are breeding specifically to regularly meet the needs of that wholesale market. And I think that's great. I think it's awesome that when someone wants a frog, they can go to their nearest pet store, be it a mom and pop, a reptile specialty store, or a big box store, and they can find a species like a Whites Treefrog that really fits their needs, and that a Whites Treefrog can appeal to specialty breeders and collectors because of the morphs, to beginners, to kids, and everyone in between. They're such a good species for the hobby to have. And it's good to hear that it's good to hear that it's not only 2 or 3 large-scale commercial wholesalers that need to be producing Whites Treefrogs, that a hobbyist breeder like yourself can be involved in the market. Again, I can't help but compare crested geckos. Again, every single pet store in America has a crested gecko for sale, but there are plenty of private hobbyist and business crested gecko breeders, and they're all serving different markets. I think from what I observe with you, you're active on social media, you're educating people who are interested in the frogs you keep, and so you're building relational customers one at a time sometimes, and that's really great. My next question for you, you mentioned the morphs. I agree that that's a really integral part of why Whites Treefrogs are maintaining, riding the crest of popularity that they are. Can you give us a rundown? The last time I paid attention, I only knew that Snowflake and Super Snowflake was a morph from back when San Fria Dragon Ranch was breeding and producing those over 10 years ago. I noticed these melanistic and camo, and I've only recently seen those online. Can you give us a list? What are the different morphs of Whites Treefrogs?
So the morphs that currently exist, the phenotypes are normal, which is just a green Australian green tree frog, so a regular green frog with no snowflakes at all. Then you have your snowflakes, you have your super snowflakes, which is just a very saturated version of a snowflake. The snowflake is a polygenic gene, so if you isolate that gene over time, you will see the saturation increase in the offspring. You have blue-eyed, which is a simple recessive gene, and it changes the color of the frog as well as the eyes. So your regular green Whites Treefrog has a golden eye, and your blue-eyeds have more of a silver tone to it. And the frog itself, they do come in a variety of colors, from a very light green to some yellow, some more of a brown color, and even like a slate gray. There's a really large variation in that morph. There's camo, like we talked about, and melanistic. Those 2 genes are linked together. So your melanistic whites will produce camos, and your camos will produce melanistics, and they also can combine. So there are melanistic whites that have green camo spots all over them. I don't know what to call that gene, because it does pass right away like a dominant gene would, but the ratios don't pan out the way that a dominant gene would. So where you expect 50% of the offspring to come out displaying the gene, even if the gene is only on one side in a dominant trait, it's not coming out that way. You get it right away, but you're not getting 50% of the offspring displaying the gene. You're maybe getting 20 to 25%. I have noticed that when you have the morph on both sides, so say the male is a melanistic and the female is a melanistic or a camo, that ratio definitely rises. But again, it doesn't fall into the category of what I would describe as dominant or co-dominant. I'm not seeing anything like gene stacking and creating something new like a super form or something would. Just the ratio
Right.
increases.
Right.
So you would get more if you have it on both sides. I can't even say 50%. Maybe it is 50% when you have it on both sides, but I wouldn't really know what to call that. It doesn't fall into your traditional categories. Maybe allelic, but if it was allelic, I feel like you wouldn't be able to cross it to say a snowflake or a normal and see visual offspring in that first go round. And we have done that. So I feel like it kind of excludes that type of gene. It's very unique. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's pretty new. With the melanistics, if it's a simple melanistic Whites tree frog and it's not camo, I have two questions for you. Does it come right out of the water, that plum color completely? And then with the individuals that do express sort of that camo pattern of plum and green, when they come out of the water, is that how the frog is going to look all the way to adulthood, or does the pattern change a lot?
That's a very good question. So every single one of these frogs comes out green, like a regular normal Whites tree frog. I've produced quite a few. I would say maybe around 400 or 500 of them that are either camo, melanistic, or a combination of the two. And out of those 400 or 500, I have gotten one single frog that came out of the water looking melanistic with black eyes and the dark skin. All of the other ones have come out completely green and normal looking. Within a few days, they start getting sprinkles of the purple or brown dots. Some of those specimens, those dots start to bleed together and eventually envelop the entire frog. Those are your melanistics. Some of the ones that get spots stop growing. They don't bleed together. You still have your splotches of green in between the brown. Those are your camos. The ones that are a combination of the two, they turn completely melanistic first, and then a few weeks into the growth, you'll start noticing small green dots coming out on top of the brown that enveloped the green frog. So it's not, you can't tell right away. It is a progression, and the progression is honestly mind-blowing. I've sold some babies that looked very impressive, and as I see them grow and I have people send me pictures of how they're growing, man, some of them I regret getting rid of because they're just so phenomenal. The way that the green and the brown kind of starts to spread out, and on the other side some of them kind of lose it. So you'll get some that as babies they're looking really radical, they have a lot of contrast, and then all of a sudden the green kind of takes over and you start seeing the brown dissipate. And some of them start looking normal. So you know the gene is there because you saw it as a baby, but it doesn't really show. And some of them look pretty average. They look nice, but I get some pictures later on and I'm like, there's no way that's the same frog. The changes that they go through is phenomenal.
Okay, wow. So I didn't know all that. That's really important information for breeders and people shopping. If you have in your mind that you want a camo Whites tree frog and you hope that it looks a certain way, depending how old it is, that's going to change with time. So something for buyers to be aware of. And then breeders like yourself, you mentioned it, hold back some stuff because you're not really sure
Absolutely.
what sort of cool things you're breeding until they get some age on them. That's cool. All right. Tell me, just describe to me how you keep Whites tree frogs. I mean, there's no shortage of care sheets on them all over the internet that someone could Google right now. There's no shortage of YouTube videos of people walking you through step-by-step how to set it up. So you don't necessarily need to explain it from that perspective. Just tell us what you do. Like, how are you keeping your Whites tree frogs?
Sure. So I think honestly this is probably one of the reasons why I have so much success is the way that I'm keeping them. Unfortunately, a lot of the care sheets that are out there, even from credible sources and sources that I truly respect, I'm not going to call any of them out, but they have terrible, terrible care sheets. They're recommending the exact opposite of what should be done with this particular species. I think what happens is they write the care sheet based on the way that these animals are found in the wild. And we're obviously not keeping them in the wild. We're keeping them in glass boxes with minimal ventilation. Even a full screen top it's still 5 sides of glass, and glass holds humidity in incredibly well. So we have to take that into account, and we have to compensate as the keeper. So these frogs come from a variety of different environments. Some of them are more humid, but these frogs really thrive on a dry and hot type of environment. So a lot of the care sheets that I see recommend 50 to 90% humidity, and this creates problems in captivity because these frogs are very sensitive frogs in general have very sensitive skin, so it makes them susceptible to absorbing bacteria if the bacteria load is too high in the tank. A lot of people want, and they have all the best intentions in wanting to make this intricate bioactive setup, and they invested in the soil and they invested in the plants and they invest in all these things with all the best intentions, wanting to give their frog the best life that they can. But inside of a glass tank, these things can create problems. I personally keep them incredibly dry and very hot. So I've tried bioactive, and I've done it successfully, but just because of the volume that I keep them in, I have moved away from the bioactive because of how much waste it produces. When you have 100 small frogs in a tank, the amount of waste that they can produce is incredible, and it kind of throws off the balance of the bioactive. So I keep them on bone dry paper towels. I give them a 90-degree basking area, and I allow the rest of the tank. I understand everybody wants to give their frogs as close to their natural habitat as possible. So bioactive is definitely an option, but we just need to consider a few things when we're setting them up that way. I want to first describe kind of how I keep them. I have moved away from bioactive just because of the volume of frogs that I keep. I keep my guys on bone dry paper towel. I give them a 90-degree basking spot, and I let the temperature gradient in the tank kind of work its way from the top at 90 to lower temperatures at the bottom. I like to give these guys at least 36 inches. I know a lot of people can't always get those size tanks. I would say at least minimum 24 inches tall, just so that you can create a healthy gradient with the heat. The heat is one of the most important things for this species of frog. They really need that 90 degrees for digestion to keep their skin healthy. A lot of things like bacteria and any sort of ailments that they may get, if you give them a nice warm basking area, they can kind of fend those things off naturally like they would in the wild. They would sit somewhere and bask for a while, dry their skin out, which would not be great for any bacteria that was sitting on the skin. When we have them in glass tanks like we do, it's a great breeding ground for bacteria. So the heat is one of the most important things to kind of give them a fighting chance. And then the other thing is keeping the humidity low. And by low, I don't mean relative humidity. So if you read every single care guide out there, they want to fixate on a percentage, and then you have your customer base doing the same thing, fixating on a percentage. So what I try to tell people is move away from relative humidity and focus on keeping the tank and the substrate dry. Get a water bowl, because these guys like to splash. They like to jump in the water, of course, like any frog, and spend time in the water. So get a water bowl with taller sides, and that doesn't necessarily mean to raise the water level higher for them, right? You can still keep the water level low, but with a tall-sided bowl, so that when they do splash in there, that water isn't exiting the bowl. and getting into the rest of the environment. We want to keep, whether it's paper towel, whether it's an ABG mix or a mimic, you want to keep it dry. And when I say dry, I mean dry. This species really thrives on hot and dry conditions in captivity. If you can replicate the height that they get in the wild, meaning you can give them a walk-in enclosure or you can give them that type of space, you're going to have more leeway to be able to do things with water. But if we're keeping them, we have to think about a tree frog and how they behave in the wild. 36 inches from the ground, which is what we create in a tank, it's kind of like their toilet. They really aren't coming down to the ground unless, one, they need to hunt, which a lot of times they can hunt from up high too. A lot of their prey, flies, they're insects. They like to, we've seen tree frogs, even our native tree frogs, we see them gather around lights to catch moths, to catch flies, to catch things like that. So a frog doesn't necessarily need to come down to the ground in order to eat. So even when we're overachieving with a 36-inch tank, to a tree frog, that is kind of bare minimum. So we need to keep that in mind. And the way that we compensate for that is by keeping it incredibly clean, keeping it dry so that bacteria doesn't have a chance to thrive in there, keeping the water nice and fresh, so that means changing it every single day, and cleaning, cleaning the glass. If you can do these things, whether it's bioactive or whether it's just as simple as can be with paper towels, you will have success with this species. What I always recommend people that are doing bioactive is to overcompensate with their drainage layer. So where you see a lot of bioactive setups with maybe 1 or 2 inches of leaka balls or lava rock or a false bottom, I recommend 4 to 5 inches of drainage so that you can really create space between where the water level is sitting at the bottom and where your substrate is sitting on top of that. You really want the water to be far away your substrate so that you can keep it dry. If you can keep these guys warm and dry like a reptile, you will have no problems. I see a lot of people posting in the Facebook groups with very similar problems. My frog has a skin infection. I don't understand how it happened. And that's exactly how it happens. Even though you're not watering your soil is getting wet because the frogs, they like to shimmy in their water bowls and the water inevitably spills out onto the dirt. And I know we don't think that's enough to create a problem, but it absolutely is enough to create a problem. Outside of increasing the drainage layer, the other thing that I suggest is that people add sand to their substrate when they're doing bioactive. There's going to be accidents, so if for whatever reason water does spill into the substrate, that sand is going to give a nice free flow for the water. It's not going to all get absorbed into the substrate right away. It's going to fall down easier into your drainage layer and allow you to keep that substrate dry. There's many ways to do it. I designed a product that's just like a little mini manhole so that you can water your substrate or water your drainage layer without ever getting your dirt wet at all. There's always a solution to every problem that we encounter when we're keeping animals, and we should all want to be a part of the solution. So when I see people having problems with their frogs, I want to help. I want to be creative and come up with different solutions that will allow them to keep bioactive, but also keep their frogs healthy. So we like to make these tanks very beautiful. We like to put different species of plants, and a lot of these plants, they require water. They require more water than your frog would need. So we have to come up with solutions where your frogs are still getting what they need and the plants are also getting what they need. And we need to troubleshoot and come up with creative ways to do that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so much good advice there to all tree frog keepers and to Whites tree frog keepers. You made me think of a couple things. You're in Florida, you know all about heat and humidity. But if people think about microclimates, the reality of microclimates, if you walked outside right now in Florida and it's 90 degrees and 90%, and your humidity monitor tells you it's 90% humidity, there's still a difference 8 feet off the ground in a tree where a gentle breeze is blowing that 90% humidity air, and down on the ground in a pile of leaves, even 24 inches off the ground where like the shady side of the tree, it takes forever for the morning dew to evaporate. It's wet there.
Absolutely.
So just 90 degrees, 90% humidity isn't the same. And like you said, especially not in a 18-inch cube glass terrarium. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing I thought about, in the world of care sheets and advice or kits, if you're buying like a Whites Treefrog kit, they often go for the bare minimum, right? Like maybe you're buying a baby frog, and so they sell you a relatively small terrarium. Nowadays, it's so easy to go big with your terrariums, especially with you can buy PVC terrariums shipped to your house for the same price as a really small glass terrarium at a store. I imagine something like a 36 by 24 by 36 or a 24-18-36 as a really nice size for a Whites Treefrog. And if you did buy one of those PVC tanks, you could drill it for drainage, and then you wouldn't have to worry about water accumulating in your substrate. And you also mentioned like that 90-degree, even think of it as a basking area. If you have a 36-inch tall terrarium and you've done a good job filling in the 3-dimensional space, which we'll talk about in a minute, your frog can choose where it wants to be in a temperature humidity gradient. And like you said, providing that heat and that ventilation, the frog will sort of solve its own problems and stay healthy by having the proper setup.
Absolutely. I get a lot of the people. Sorry.
Go ahead. We have a little delay, so go ahead.
A lot of the people that I talk to with the bacterial issues, they'll tell me, well, I've had my frog set up like this for a year. Why is it happening now? And the fact of the matter is, these frogs are probably the hardiest species of tree frog that you could get your hands on in captivity. And just because they're strong enough to tolerate it for a long period of time doesn't mean that it's good for them. And I try to relay that to people. If you want to have long-term success, we have to set them up for that long-term success. And low humidity, high temps is that long-term success.
Right on. Let's talk about feeding Whites Treefrogs. No doubt you've probably seen an Instagram reel of a Whites Treefrog acting like it has very few brain cells, munching on its tank mate or on the keeper's fingers. It just shows that they're very eager to eat, which is probably one of the reasons why they are so easy to maintain in captivity for everyone, even beginners. That being said, as derpy and eager to bite your finger as they are, what does ideal nutrition look like for a Whites Treefrog?
These guys with reptiles and frogs, I always feel like variety is best. When they're young, just coming out of the water, because a lot of people will buy tadpoles, crickets is probably the easiest way to feed them and kind of get them out of that baby stage, because it's easy to get appropriately sized crickets. Roaches is also a wonderful option. I think the roach itself is a better capsule than the cricket is. It holds the nutrition that you give it a little bit better. They're a little bit meatier, hardier than a cricket. But realistically, Whites Treefrogs will eat anything that moves that is smaller than them, including other frogs. I've seen pictures on the internet of Whites Treefrogs eating snakes. I've seen people feeding them pinkies. I've seen literally anything that moves that is smaller than them. They will try and go after it. And they're very capable. They can climb, they can jump. They're pretty quick. So most insects are a great option for them. I've seen a lot of people that say you shouldn't feed them hard-bodied worms because they have a hard time digesting them. And I would agree with that when the frog is young. So maybe from the time it comes out of the water until it's about 2 inches in length, I would say it's probably a little bit dangerous to try and feed them hard-bodied worms as a staple diet. But once they get to that 2 inch mark, they do really well. Even on mealworms, the appropriate sized superworm, any soft bodied worm, so your silkworms, your waxworms, your butterworms, black soldier fly larvae, any of those things are going to be excellent options. I've seen people in other countries, I can't keep locusts here in Florida, they're not legal, but I've seen people in other countries successfully breed and feed their frogs locusts, grasshoppers, you name it. I mean, pretty much any feeder that is being fed well is going to be a good option for your Whites tree frogs. Night crawlers, anything. Really anything that moves, and it doesn't even have to be small. These guys like larger prey. So I've seen them, you've seen videos of them kind of using their front arms to shove things in their mouth if it's a little bit too big. And they really do prefer larger prey. A lot of the times when people buy small babies, they tend to feed them items that are a little bit too small out of caution, because they don't want the frog to, whether it's choke or maybe prolapse trying to push it out. But these frogs really do prefer larger prey. So babies, instead of feeding them flies, we start our babies off on 1/8 inch crickets, and we only do 1/8 inch for about a week, and then we move them straight up to 1/4 inch. And they do incredibly, incredibly well on that size. You want to get these guys out of the baby stage as quick as possible. And I think that's one of the best ways, is to manage the size of the prey instead of trying to jam them with a large quantity of small prey. Just give them a few pieces of larger prey, and they really blow up in size when you kind of manage that well. The old rule of thumb for reptiles, distance between the eyes, is an excellent rule here. And once they get to that 2 or 3 inch mark, even larger, so they can handle your adult crickets, larger roaches, just because they're so animated and ready to eat. These guys love to eat. Like I mentioned before, that's one of my favorite things about them, is watching them eat. And when it's feeding time, letting those crickets go in the tank and just watching all of them bounce back and forth and catch the crickets and shove them in their mouth, and they're already looking for another one without even swallowing yet. It's one of the best things about keeping these frogs is feeding them. So there's no shortage of good options as far as what to feed them out there. As long as you're gut loading your prey well, really anything that they're willing to eat is a good choice.
Awesome. Yeah, having a front opening enclosure and being able to also have the option to hand feed or tongue feed a tree frog adds to the experience of keeping them as a pet that I think a lot of people can enjoy. And you gave us the list. Basically every available reptile, feeder, insect appropriately sized can work for them. Being careful not to limit it to just one thing, and using your vitamin supplements and gut loading. Awesome. Tell us about your experiences breeding them. You mentioned there was a learning curve at first after your first attempt or two, but you've been doing it for several years now. So what is the routine, and what does it take to breed and raise all those young frogs?
Absolutely. So yeah, my first couple of attempts, I was pretty much just kind of copying the little bit of information that I had seen out there, whether it was videos of Pac-Man frogs being bred, or you see videos of pixie frogs and the way that they set up their rain chambers or breeding areas. It works for those species because of how in the wild how they would do it. But tree frogs, they really do well when you provide them with a large surface area of water and space to swim. The actual act of them pushing the eggs out and the males being in amplexus with the females, it takes place in the water, and the females are literally swimming with the male on their back like a backpack. The male stimulates the female to release the eggs by lifting her back legs up with his back legs and simultaneously dropping sperm as the eggs are coming out of the female. So what I've seen a lot of people, including myself when I started, is they play it a little bit too cautious. That they don't want. There's a lot of information out there that says that these frogs are terrible swimmers, that they'll drown, And while they can drown, they are not terrible swimmers. They're very, very proficient swimmers and very capable of getting themselves out of the water if need be. They can climb onto the sides of the enclosure. A lot of the times they'll use the hardware that you're using for the rain, whether it's PVC pipes or, the hose for the water pump. They'll use those things to kind of get out of the water or anchor themselves if they need to. So for successful breeding, you don't want to play it too safe. You want to give them a large area. I use 55-gallon tanks or 55-gallon plastic totes or something similar in size like that. I fill the bottom with artificial plants submerged in the water so that they can be in the water but still have anchor points, so where they're not just free swimming all the time, right? Like they can sit in the water but still be sitting on something. They kind of use those plants as like a raft. And then I give them minimal to no exit areas where they can sit and not breed. So having these guys in, because they like and thrive in lower humidity, you really want to have them in the chamber for 2 to 3 days maximum. Anything more than that, and you will start seeing skin issues. You may walk into a dead frog. It really does happen that quickly. So you want to create the conditions that encourages them to be in the water and breed so that you can get them out of that situation and back into their warm and dry tank as soon as possible. So large surface area, a lot of submerged plants, and then some form of rain, whether that be a water pump with a rain bar on top. I've seen people get pretty creative with it. They don't all do it the same style, but it all works. As long as you have the water being picked up above them and being dropped down on top of them like rain, they do really well. You don't need to have the rain on all the time. A lot of people like to put the water pump on a timer, so they'll turn it on for a couple of hours, turn it off for a couple of hours. I've left it on for a couple days straight. I've had success both ways. I was really big on saying that Whites Treefrogs wouldn't breed in water bowls because I do have some Amazon milk frogs and they're notorious for laying their eggs anywhere. They'll breed in a little tiny water bowl, little bit bigger than they are. From my experience, whites are not like that. I did have them breed in a larger sterilite tote one time inside of their tank, but that was a one-off. I think I haven't had them do that again. A little bit of I try to sync, like when I'm going to put them into the rain chamber with maybe a storm that's going to be coming, so that you can use the barometric pressure drops from nature to your advantage and just kind of let them feel that vibe that there's a storm coming, because that's what stimulates them to breed. Being from a drier area, they wait for these storms to create these pools or these big puddles, and that's where they would lay their eggs. Their cycle is incredibly fast. These eggs, once they're laid, they hatch in 24 hours. So you go from seeing these little tiny eggs to the next day they look like little kidney beans, and then the day after that they're already swimming around. So it's a very fast process. The warmer that you keep them, the faster that the process is. Kind of similar to reptiles. If you incubate the eggs a little bit warmer, they come out a little bit faster. It's a fascinating process.
Right, yeah. Tadpole care, when you're dealing with 1,000+ little tadpoles that come all at once, must be pretty serious business. You have to have the good understanding of aquarist water parameters, right? How do you keep tadpole water clean? What do you feed tadpoles? And how soon will a tadpole turn into a froglet?
Oh man, great questions. I'll start with the last one. I've purposely done experiments to see how fast I can do it, and when I've kept them on the warmer side, closer to like 85 degrees Fahrenheit, I've been able to get from the egg hatching to a froglet out of the water in 18 days. Now, that's not how it happens every
Wow.
single time, but that was me purposely trying to do it as fast as possible. So, changing the water often to keep it clean and feeding them 2 or 3 times a day, I was able to do it that fast. But a more realistic average is going to be about 4 to 6 weeks from egg to froglet. And again, there's a direct correlation between the temperature that you do it at and how quickly they come out. So if you're keeping them indoors, meaning the tadpoles, and your water is a little bit cooler, you're going to be more on that 6 week time frame. If you're keeping them outdoors in like a building, but outdoor warmth, you might be closer to 4 weeks. I have recently set up some outdoor cages, and like outdoors, not in a building, and they have bred in there, and the tadpoles grow incredibly fast when they have access to the sun. I don't know what it is about it. I've even gone to the extent of not feeding those tadpoles just to see how quickly they grow, and they're feeding on the plant matter that falls into the pool, and they're still growing faster than the tadpoles that I have indoors. There's something about being outdoors that is very good for them and their growth. As far as how I keep the tadpoles, I use those same either 55-gallon tanks or totes. I do have some that are a little bit larger. It depends on the quantity that I'm dealing with. But a lot of times if I have a large quantity, I'll just split them up into different tanks so that it's not getting soiled as quickly and there's less work. So I use these 55 to, let's say, 75-gallon tanks or totes. I load them up with sponge filters. So as little as 6, as much as 12 sponge filters. It depends on how much work you want to do. The more sponge filters that you have, the less water changes you'll need to do. And a bubbler for oxygen, and a water heater if it's a cooler time of the year, because if you keep them cooler, they will grow very, very slow. So I like to keep the water between 78 and 82 degrees. If you go a little bit warmer than that, that's when you kind of start seeing that really fast progression. But on average, a large tote, sponge filters, a bubbler, and a heater. And I feed Repashy fish foods. Repashy, the brand, they make several different types of fish food. The most common one is called Soylent Green. They kind of advertise it for fish and amphibians, but they do have other diets. They have one that I use that's called Super Green. That's kind of what it sounds like. It's more of a vegetation-based diet, where the Soylent Green has other ingredients like krill and other proteins and stuff like that. There's another one that they have that's called Spawn and Grow, which is specifically for fry and smaller fish that you want to increase the caloric intake. So I don't use that one like on a regular basis like a staple. I'll use that kind of as a supplement or a treat, so to say, to maybe speed up the growth a little bit. But the way that these diets work, just like all Repashy products, they come in a powder. You mix it with boiling water to create like a gelatin, and then I'll store that gelatin, that pre-made diet, in the fridge, and as they need to be fed, I will drop some food into the tank. Now I kind of have it dialed into how much I want to feed, and it's based on the amount of tadpoles. But if you're just getting started, what I recommend is cut very small pieces of food and see how quickly it gets consumed. So if you put a piece of food in there and it's completely gone in 30 minutes, you can definitely increase the size of the block of food. Or if a lot of people don't want to buy such a specific type of a diet like the Repashy, spirulina flakes, algae wafers, things like that you can get at a regular pet store will work just as well. I've seen people feed like boiled greens like lettuce and things like that, and they say they've had success with that. Like I said, my guys outdoors, they're eating strictly vegetation, and the growth it's there. You know, they draw their nutrition from wherever nature gives it to them. They eat each other sometimes, so I know for sure that they like protein. I've pretty much in every spawn, you see little runts or little stragglers that either don't make it or they just start kind of getting nibbled on by the bigger ones, and these guys don't discriminate when they see weakness. They kind of just see it as a nutrition. Even in the tadpole stage, I like to describe them kind of like a parasite, because when you drop the food in there, it's like a feeding frenzy. Like every single one of the tadpoles in the tank will swarm on this piece of food just so that they can get their little chunk, and all they want to do is grow. Is one of the easiest species of tadpoles that I've worked with. Actually, the easiest. Every other species of tadpole has been a little bit more challenging and pickier as far as what they like. For example, like Amazon milk frogs, not that they don't like the protein, but they really do a lot better if you give them a more vegetation-based diet. They like the algae wafers a lot. They like that super green that I feed. Doesn't have as much protein in it. They seem to gravitate more towards vegetation as far as nutrition goes. But as far as tadpole care, that's pretty much it. You want to keep the water clean, but there is such a thing as too clean also. These guys, the way that I describe it is, if there's color in the water but the water is still clear, you're still doing all right. But when the tank gets dirty, you can kind of see a fogginess in the water. That's when you need to do a water change. When the tadpoles are young, you don't really need to change the water. So for like the first week, I don't touch the water. Once you put the filters in and you let everything cycle out and get going, you just kind of observe them. I don't even feed them for the first week because they eat their egg sac. So the very eggs that they came out of, they're gonna go in and eat all of that massive egg sac, and those are their first few meals. I don't move them out of the rain chamber until I see that egg sac is completely gone. And from the moment that they hatch to the moment that egg sac is completely gone and the water is crystal clear, they triple or quadruple in size. Once the tadpoles eat the egg mass, by that time they've kind of tripled or quadrupled in size. So I moved them into the tank that I was talking about with the sponge filters, and that's pretty much where they stay during the growth process and into the morphing process. So that's where I feed them, where I'm doing all my water changes. At first, when the tadpoles are small, it's not a lot of water changes. As the tadpoles grow, they eat more, which soils the water, and they create more waste, which soils the water. That's when you kind of start doing your water changes. When I do a water change, I pretty much just drain about 75% of the water, and then I put fresh water in there. I use a product called Microbe Lift, which is pretty much just a bacteria that you put into the water to help manage nitrates and things like that. Just a beneficial bacteria. It kind of gets sucked up into the sponge filters and creates a natural environment for your tadpoles, like a pond. Once they start morphing, so they get their back legs and then their front legs pop out and they're climbing onto the sponge filters or whatever little docks I have in there for them to exit. As soon as they morph and come out of the water, I'll put them into a terrestrial tank and they're frogs now. So the first couple days as frogs, they'll absorb their tail. That's going to be their first meal for the first 2 or 3 days. I don't feed them at all. I have tried feeding them right away and they simply don't eat. So the first few days, I give them a nice warm 90-degree basking spot. It helps them absorb that tail as quick as possible. You'll see small little bits of poop kind of start appearing in the tank around day 2 or day 3. And as soon as you see that poop, that's when you start feeding. And then you're just into regular Whites Treefrog care at that point, with feeding every other day to every 3 days. The first week of froglet care, I do miss the tank because they're just so small that it's very easy for them to desiccate. But once they start eating, I stop misting and only provide the water in the water bowl like I would for an adult. As far as feeding the babies, 1/8 inch crickets for the first week, and then I bump them up to 1/4 inch crickets. They do really, really well once you start feeding them those 1/4 inches, and they kind of exit that baby stage pretty quickly. Within 2 or 3 weeks, they'll already be eating 1/2 inch crickets, and before you know it, you have a full-grown frog on your hands.
Yeah, it's quite the involved process. I guess breeding Whites Treefrogs, it sounds to me a lot like toads. The way that they explosively give you thousands of eggs, I didn't know how quickly the tadpoles can develop, and then you have a lot of baby frogs on your hands all at once.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a fairly simple process, but you got to be prepared for it, ready for it, to handle that stuff, to give the daily maintenance, the cleanliness, and make sure you have enough food on hand when you get those froglets to maintain. That's awesome. Now that I know that you came from the reptile hobby into the amphibian hobby, it makes a little bit more sense to me that why you're 3D printing, because it's a lot more common to see that amongst like gecko and snake people than it is amphibian hobbyists. But I'm pretty excited about what I see coming from creative people who know how to 3D print, which isn't me, because there's some real paths forward for improving care of frogs with 3D printed objects in captivity. So why don't you tell us how you started 3D printing and some of the things that you've worked on for frog husbandry with your 3D printers?
Absolutely. So, kind of like you, I really didn't know too much about 3D printing. Even a year ago, I got into this pretty recently. I bought my first printer in December. I did extensive research on it and kind of just bought the most user-friendly printer that would be plug and play. And I started learning as much as I could about it because there was a need for products personally that just don't exist. So as a breeder, as somebody who keeps several hundred frogs at any given time, there were things that I needed that just didn't exist. I didn't know where to find them. So for example, when I'm doing my water changes, when the tadpoles are very, very small, it's very easy for them to get sucked into the siphon. And I was going out to like a restaurant depot type of a place and buying either like little strainers and gluing them together and just going through this whole process. And it still wasn't perfect. You know, there were little imperfections. So I just kind of noted all these things that I need. And once I got the idea to get the printer, I just started kind of tinkering with the things that I needed. That's where I started. For that particular scenario that I talked about with the siphon, I made one of these little siphon guards so I can just drop this into the tank and I put my siphon inside of here and pump it so that I can get the water going without worrying about any of the tadpoles actually ever getting sucked up. What I was using before was literally 2 strainers silicone together with a hole cut at the top that I would put the siphon into, and it was inconvenient. It worked, but it was inconvenient. The hole at the top was a little bit too big, so if it dropped too far into the water, I would still get tadpoles in there. A lot of things that I have been designing have come from ideas that my customers had. So they have a problem or something a need that they have, but they can't find a product out there that is being produced. So we're coming up with solutions. One of the first ideas that I got from one of my customers was they were having an issue with the crickets getting under their paper towels. So she wanted to create some weights that held the corners of the paper towels down so that the crickets wouldn't get underneath and the frogs would be able to hunt them and eat. So I created these little weights, and all it is it's a little hollow box. And what I did was I used fishing weights. So I designed the box to kind of have the perfect cylinder inside to drop the weight in there. And then you put one weight on each corner and it keeps the paper towels nice and flush. And that way the crickets stay on top and the frogs are able to eat all the crickets. Everything that I've designed has been kind of an idea from somebody that I was working with or talking to, and we had a problem and came up with a solution. Another one that I recently designed, I have one of my customers had an incredible success with Amazon milk frogs, which is a species that I've really struggled with as far as raising them past the froglet point. There's something about keeping them in quantity that makes it really difficult to get them to grow in numbers. I haven't had success, so I only sell them as tadpoles, and I try to put them into the hands of people who are really talented at raising these guys as froglets. But one of her ideas was she noticed that she put little cups up above the ground, and that's where the frogs really preferred to go and spend time in the water. So she asked me to make a platform, a two-tiered platform, where she could put larger cups into it and fill them with water so that the frogs could hang out and still be above ground level. So we kind of came up with this. Very simple, but this way you can remove the cups and just put new ones in there, or take them out and clean them and then put them back. Keeping the water clean for froglets is one of the most important things when trying to get them to grow. Water, it's one of the things that can make them sick the quickest, is if you have foul water in there. But on the opposite side, if you keep the water clean, it really helps them to grow really, really fast and keep them healthy. Just like the heat can kind of help battle some things, clean water can also help them flush their systems out if something isn't right. So keeping their water clean, and one of the best ways to keep the water clean is to keep the water bowl itself off the ground. So where with Whites Treefrogs, I combated the cleanliness with raising the height of the sides so that the water isn't splashing out, but also things like substrate aren't getting into the bowl. With these guys, we just decided to lift it up off the ground so that it's nowhere near the substrate, whether it's moss or dirt or anything like that. And she hasn't gotten her prototype yet, but I just printed these out, so I'm really excited to kind of get them in her hands and see how they work. She's very excited. She thinks it's going to be a game changer for her, so I want to get that done. Awesome. ASAP.
Yep. I know for years before people started tinkering with 3D printing, you see those frog-faced suction cup green cups, and whatever they are, I don't even know what company makes them. Whites Treefrogs love them. Like if you put one of those in your tank, the tree frogs find it, and there's just whatever it is about that elevated perch, possibly with water in it. Whites Treefrogs love them. And so that's a behavior that we notice in captivity that maybe is unique to captivity, but by letting our imagination and our observations of what the tree frogs want to do in captivity, 3D printing can improve their life. Another thing I notice is that brand new people who have never set up any sort of terrarium have a really hard time filling in the three-dimensional space inside of a terrarium. They just take, like, the classic thing is like 2 sticks diagonal from bottom corner to top corner, and there's still so much wasted three-dimensional space that the frogs could be using. But 3D printing different ledges and fake mushrooms and perches and hides and tubes and cylinders, it allows someone who isn't going down the route of custom making a foam cork bark silicone background, right? Someone who maybe isn't that hands-on DIY, they can buy a handful of 3D printed products and fill in that three-dimensional space and give their frogs so much more usable area to live in. So
Absolutely.
I think it's just beginning in the frog hobby, it's especially suited to tree frogs, I think, 3D printing.
I think so too. I've seen quite a few small things that can be applied to other species, but like you said, that filling that space, that three-dimensional space in the center of the tank, especially for a tree frog, because they can get anywhere, even just on the glass. You know, you'll find your tree frogs just kind of snug up in that 90-degree angle where the glass meets. If you can give them areas where they can climb into, like a tree hollow or anything that simulates that, they're going to choose that because that's where they feel secure. If you have a secure frog, they're going to eat better. You know, if they pretty much everything is kind of it's all related. You know, if your frog feels comfortable in the environment that you give it, it's going to thrive. And filling that space is one of those areas that really can increase the way that they feel secure, because they are smaller animals. So if you have other pets like cats, dogs, even if they're not trying to get into the tank, if the frog can see these animals walking by, it may make them a little more apprehensive to come out and eat, which can affect the way they grow and things like that. So if they have small areas where they can be hiding in plain sight, so to say, it makes a huge difference for the frog and for you. You know, you see the benefits almost right away.
Right on. Well, thanks so much for talking about Whites Treefrogs with me today. I wanted to mention that, you know, thousands of people are keeping frogs. Thousands of people are keeping Whites Treefrogs, and a small percentage of those people engage with each other online, and I think that's great. Part of the hobby is just enjoying it with other people, and the primary way I think people do that is on social media. I know you have a presence on social media. Before you just tell us where to find you, do you have anything to say to people who are engaging online to share the love of this hobby, sort of your attitude or your approach to engaging with other frog keepers online?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me, Joe. It's been awesome. Where I feel like everybody that keeps animals does it from a perspective of passion, and passion comes from a good place, a place of love, and that's really where all of this should come from. So the way that I see it, there really is no room for not sharing success and not sharing anything positive that you have to offer with other people. If we enjoy this, I want every single person that interacts with me, whether they purchase from me or not, I want them to have a positive experience and enjoy it as much as I'm enjoying it. And that's kind of how I approach this. I imagine when I first started and how little help I got, and I want to be the difference for the people that are coming in, to have somewhere to go or somewhere to ask questions and get a positive response, not somebody that's going to meet them with resistance or give them bits and pieces and still kind of leave them asking questions, but somewhere that's transparent. And if I don't know, I can reach out to somebody who does, you know, and that's my approach. Just positivity. I always say lead with love, because I love this. I do this out of love, and I absolutely love what I do, and I want to share it with as many people as possible. So that's the way that I approach it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good attitude. I've noticed that about you online. Yeah, like we said, if you don't have time to share the hobby online, that's okay. Don't even bother then. Just don't be if you don't have the patience and the time to share, that's okay. But if you're engaging online, if you're a new person, don't be afraid to ask questions. Even if your first response is sort of not meeting you with kindness, most people are good, and most people in the hobby and in the Facebook groups and sharing pictures on Instagram, like you said, they love the animals and they want to see other people be successful with them and grow the hobby and share it with each other, just for the fun of that, just for that
I feel like that's
community
why we're
approach.
sharing, you know?
Yeah.
Because we love it.
Right on. Right. So tell people, Reptidonz is your online handle. Where are you most active? How should people look for you and find you?
Yeah, Facebook is definitely where I'm most active. I do have an Instagram. I don't check it as often, but Reptidonz Facebook is really where you'll probably get the most engagement from me. We do, myself and the group of breeders that I'm working with, we have a Facebook group called Whites Treefrogs Worldwide that we're really trying to grow and just share the positive perspective that we have and the things that we're doing. We all work together. I've helped them learn how to do what I'm doing, and now it's coming back around full circle. And when I have problems, I'm able to present it to these group of breeders this group of breeders that I have kind of mentored, and now it's to a point where they're helping me when I have a problem. We now have kind of a network of people that we're bouncing ideas off of each other and able to solve problems even faster than if it was only one person doing it. And it's a beautiful thing to be a part of. I'm incredibly proud of every single one of the people I'm working with. I've watched them go from being so nervous about the way they're doing things and afraid they're going to mess up to now they're teaching me things. It's absolutely beautiful. I'm so proud. And but Whites Treefrogs worldwide, you can find all those breeders in that group. We're really pushing to show people that not everybody's negative. You know,
Awesome.
There's a lot of people out there willing to help, and questions need to be answered. You know, we want you guys to succeed as much as we do. I'm happy to teach other people how to breed. Just know what you're getting into. You know, be prepared, like you said. That's going to be the most important part. But if you're positive about it and you have a good perspective, you will 100% be successful.
Awesome. I hope more people hop into the Whites Treefrog hobby, join the Facebook groups, and connect with other like-minded people. Follow Reptidonz on Facebook. We only talked about one species today. I know you keep a bunch of others. I saw your outdoor enclosure for yellow-spotted tree toads recently, and you'll have to come back on the podcast to tell me more about that. How about it?
It would be a pleasure, Joe.
All right, man.
You let me know, man.
For today, goodbye. Thanks, everyone, for joining the Frogcast.
Bye, guys.